We are millennial college students who believe in the problem about greenhouse gases affecting climate change, and we want to raise awareness to the consequences of this issue. We want to communicate specific concerns and solutions to our generation and following generations in order to improve the negative effects of greenhouse gases. All of our social, economic, and political changes must work to physically change our environment. First, we must agree to survive. Then, we must help our progeny.
The problem of emission greenhouse gases and climate change is acknowledged by most of the leaders of foreign countries. However, for the United States government, it is still a subject of debate and not a legitimate concern which most politicians do not take action against. In contrast to countries within the European Union, the United States is producing much more greenhouse gases.
Electricity production generates the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. Approximately 67% of our electricity comes from burning fossil fuels, mostly coal and natural gas. Carbon dioxide, CO2, makes up the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions from the sector, but small amounts of methane, CH4, and nitrous oxide, N2O, are also emitted. These gases are released during the combustion of fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas to produce electricity. Less than 1% of greenhouse gas emissions from the sector come from sulfur hexafluoride, SF6, an insulating chemical used in electricity transmission and distribution equipment. Although coal accounts for about 77% of CO2 emissions from the sector, it represents about 39% of the electricity generated in the United States. Greenhouse gas emissions from electricity have increased by about 11% since 1990, as electricity demand has grown and fossil fuels have remained the dominant source for generation.
Greenhouse gas emissions from industry primarily come from burning fossil fuels for energy, as well as greenhouse gas emissions from certain chemical reactions necessary to produce goods from raw materials. The greenhouse gases emitted during industrial production are split into two categories: direct emissions that are produced at the facility, and indirect emissions that occur off-site but are associated with the facility's use of energy. Direct emissions are produced by burning fuel for power or heat through chemical reactions and from leaks from industrial processes or equipment. Most direct emissions come from the consumption of fossil fuels for energy. Indirect emissions are produced by burning fossil fuels to power vehicles and machinery that a company are using off-site.
Greenhouse gas emissions from transportation primarily come from burning fossil fuels for our cars, trucks, ships, trains, and planes. Over 90% of the fuel used for transportation is petroleum-based, which includes gasoline and diesel. The majority of greenhouse gas emissions from transportation are CO2 emissions resulting from the combustion of petroleum-based products like gasoline, internal combustion engines. The largest source of transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions include passenger cars and light-duty trucks, including sport utility vehicles, pickup trucks, and minivans. The remainder of greenhouse gas emissions comes from other modes of transportation, including freight trucks, commercial aircraft, ships, boats, and trains, as well as pipelines and lubricants. In 2013, greenhouse gas emissions from transportation accounted for about 27% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, making it the second largest contributor of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions after the electricity sector.
Deforestation is the clearing of Earth's forests. This damages about 70% of land animals and plants' homes. One drive for deforestation is agriculture. Farmers cut down forests for farming purposes and will clear areas to feed families by cutting down trees and burning them in a process called slash and burn agriculture. Deforestation's biggest problem is that it affects climate change. Without trees to block the sun, the forest's moist soil would dry out. Not only do the forest trees block out the sun from drying up the soil, They also play a critical role for absorbing greenhouse gases that fuel global warming. If we continue to cut down forests, the more greenhouse gases are let out into the atmosphere.
We want to live in the country where politicians acknowledge the existence of climate change and the lack of action is not excused by economic development. Politicians should create more laws and institutions which will control emission of greenhouse gases. This will help fight climate change and its negative effects.